what y'all's experience is in terms of how much open source communities do tend to focus on security. Like, is it something that is more on the radar now these days within communities, or is it still something that the open source ecosystem itself needs some more education about?
More education around security would be good for everybody across the board right now, but I do see a whole lot more awareness in open source communities and funding, honestly, from those entities that are funding open source and have been, let's say, contributing to Python or Rust or any number of other foundations for a long time. I know many of those organizations have increased their funding, and specifically towards efforts to secure open source software communities and the build pipelines, the channels, the distribution mechanisms for them. Switching hats a tiny bit, the agency I work with, one of the efforts we just held 2 months ago was a summit in DC focused on open source package repositories, and discussing and talking with them about their efforts to increase the security of package indexes and how open source packages are shared, built, and transported around between all the consumers of them. That was really positive. We actually just this week released the tabletop exercise scenario that we developed for that. I think it's the first time that any government has ever done sort of a emergency modeling, emergency response planning with the open source community.
I haven't seen that yet. I mean, as you look at the various, I mean, it seems as though there are many efforts going on. And again, as you said, there's definitely more focus and more investment in making things better. As you look across the ecosystem, can you say what the top 2 or 3 things are from a low-hanging fruit? What you will expect to have the best impact of activities going on?
I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I think the distribution mechanisms are natural focal points. So where package indexes and compilers, build tools, these are the focal points that most open source code and communities move through and collaborate on. So they're the most important ones to secure. They're the ones that most folks are focusing efforts around raising the bar and building collaboration, communication with. I think that's really good. I know that Europe has done a lot of work on legislation and regulatory action around open source. And the CRA, Cyber Resiliency Act, has had a lot of discussion and will continue to, I'm sure. And there's a Securing Open Source Software Act in the US that's still in the legislative process, not up for a vote or anything, but it's out there. There's a lot of stuff like that going on. So I'm optimistic that this will improve and that the right folks are in the right rooms. Government doesn't accidentally squash this fantastic community and economic force that we've all built simply due to a lack of awareness. That might have happened several years ago, but I think a lot of the right folks are in the room now, so that won't happen.
When I work with various teams, some of the things that I hear from them are, and I do want to hear you elaborate maybe a little bit about the distribution topics that you're alluding to. When you say that, I'm thinking typo squatting, improving that, improving signing of artifacts, and that as 2 obvious areas. I've had folks want to be able to have a more modular way of consuming open source, back to open source bloat, right? So you bring in a series of packages, and there isn't an easy way to decompose something to only the parts of that given piece of open source that you need. So you include it all. And, at a minimum, it means that, even if you don't make any calls and you never actually have a code flow that works through that code, you're still going to get that vulnerability pop up when the when the CVE scan happens. And so you've got to go through, do I use this? Do I not use this? So actually, trying to reduce the size of that attack vector to begin with, and also improve the reporting is a topic that I've heard from various development teams. Do you think something like that from a systemic standpoint across the ecosystem would help? in trying to be more modular?
I do. I don't know from a technical standpoint what that modularity would look like. I've been a developer for enough of my life to imagine how impossible that would be with current languages.
Yeah.
And you know, software development frameworks, they're designed for a different problem than this one. Maybe taking a fresh look at how software systems and digital systems are designed from the ground up with security in mind might yield a different programming paradigm that lends itself more to that outcome. But that's a big long-term lift, not a short-term solution.
Yeah. Not a low-hanging fruit.
No, not a low-hanging fruit. On the other topic you touched on, sort of CVEs and the relationship between open source components, and maybe you import a Jinja templating engine because you just really wanted to render one little file, but there are CVEs against the whole templating engine that aren't in the code you're actually running. Not that I'm picking on one project, but it may be a thing I saw years ago. There is a proposed approach for entities to be able to publish assertions that they have done the test and they are not affected by a vulnerability, by a CVE called VEX, Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange. And some work around that is ongoing in the industry and the community at large. There's some open source projects around that. It goes hand in hand with an SBOM. You publish an SBOM saying, here are the dependencies in my product, and here's the VEX statements that I'm not affected by those CVEs. Even though you can see the project is in my product, this is why it's safe. I think that's a good in principle, but it's going to become very, very burdensome as the dependency graphs become better understood. I think that's the underlying point you're getting to, Phil, right? Most products today, if 85% of the lines of code is open source, well, that's probably thousands of projects all bundled together in dependency trees. A project I started a while ago with some colleagues at Microsoft, working with Cisco, before I joined CISA, called OmniBOR, Universal Dependency Graph, BOR for Bill of Receipts. And the approach is deceptively simplistic. Let's take technology we all already know and love, Git, and the way that Git models dependency in between commit versions, to apply that to dependency between software artifacts. Could potentially also help with that, just tracking what's in a binary back from the source code to the built artifact. But ultimately, I think we might need to rethink some of the relationship modeling between complex software products and CVEs against the small projects that get built into them. We might need to take a fresh look at that whole system, or just build better tools to handle this more efficiently as the volume increases. I'm not sure.